Let's see what are all those properties Qtable widget has that we can edit and tweak to fit our needs. I'm just going to go over some because, as you saw earlier, there really are lots of them, but thankfully most of them are pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to select our Qtable widget, and let's start off with the properties from the QFrame class. The first property at the top is the frame shape, which defines the shape of the frame that contains our Qtable widget. Right now it's set to styled panel, so let me change that from styled panel to box, and as you can see it changed a little bit. The design is slightly different. Now I can go to this line width property below and set it from 1 to 5. You can see that definitely we have this kind of grayish line around the Qtable widget. We can also change the frame shadow from sunken to, let's say, plane, and we have this kind of a plane shadow that surrounds our Qtable widget. But since this doesn't really look that good, I'm just going to revert everything back to defaults, and to do that we can just click this red arrow to the right of each property. Okay, so now let's head down to our QAbstract scroll area class, and that holds two different policies, the two different scroll bar policies. Right now, if we run out of room by adding more and more rows, for example, to our Qtable widget, a scroll bar, a vertical scroll bar, is going to appear on the screen. We can override that policy by going from scroll bar as needed to, for example, scroll bar always off or scroll bar always on. So revert back to default as well as our line width. Now let's jump down to QAbstract item view and edit triggers property and expand it. And remember how in my last video I was able to edit my name simply by double clicking the item. Well, I was able to do that because this double clicked edit trigger is set to true. We also have other edit triggers such as any key pressed or edit key pressed, which are both true. And if we want to disable edit triggers, we can just mark this no edit triggers as true. Let me scroll down some more. You see a bunch of these properties such as drag enable, drag drop override method. Qtable widget does support drag and drop, but unfortunately that's out of scope for this course. Still, it's very good to know that that support exists. Now there's this interesting property called alternating row colors, and to demonstrate it I'm going to scroll down and jump down a little bit to the row count and increase it from 1 to, let's say, 5, and as you can see we now have 5 rows. Go back to alternating row colors, mark it as checked. Now every other row has a different color. This is very useful for differentiation, and I personally find this pretty visually appealing. Going back up, we still have the text elide mode that we saw in our QTabWidget video. And in our Qtable view class, we have the show grid, which is this grid that separates our rows and columns. If I turn that off, that grid disappears. So let's turn it back on. We also have the grid style property, which is going to change the way these lines look like. But to see it better, let's turn off our alternating row colors. And we can change from solid line to, for example, dash line or dot line. Put it back to solid line. Word wrap is also responsible for wrapping the words within an item. We already saw what row count and column count do, so if you want to, for some reason, arbitrarily add more rows or columns to your Qtable widget, you can use row count or column count. Now we get to the header part, and let me just stretch this out a little bit so we can see these properties a little bit better. Now the header is this part where it says name, Twitter, nice guy, but also this part where it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in our case. This is the horizontal header and this is the vertical header. The horizontal header visible makes sure that the header is, well, visible, similar to the vertical header visible below. If I turn off the horizontal header visible, you can see that our horizontal header disappears. Let's turn it back on. We also have the horizontal header default section size as well as the minimum section size. And think of a section size as something like a width for the horizontal header. Similarly to that, we have the same thing for our vertical header, default section size, as well as a minimum section size. Now, we also have this interesting property called stretch last section, which in our case might be useful because what it will do in case of horizontal header, it's going to take this last column it has and stretch it to match the width of our QTable widget container and not look like this kind of, this nice guy column assumes its default section size and ends abruptly. So let's mark that as checked, and you can see that the nice guy is now stretch all the way to the right. There, we went over some of the most often used properties when working with QTable widget. Now, one thing to note when it comes to QTable widget itself is that normally you'd set all these properties as well as all the items and data from the code. But still, I believe that this video as well as the last one were very useful to show you all the different things you can do with QTable widget and its items.